I'm Joseph.
And I'm Nick.
And this is Fish Jelly. How are you?
I'm great. How are you?
Good.
I'm just fine.
Oh, that shifted very
I
quickly.
wanted to be Tony the Tiger for just a second.
So it's not raining at the moment.
Yeah, we've had like 2 days without rain.
But it's going to continue.
It is?
Yeah. And tomorrow and the day after should be very wet.
I'm tired of that.
Sarah Polly? Is that the lady who did Women Talking?
Yeah.
Oh, today's her birthday.
Happy birthday, girl.
So we were asked what we thought about the Renfield trailer.
Renfield?
What do you think about the Renfield trailer?
It looks entertaining and finally a role that Nicolas Cage can sink his teeth into.
And you watched the Barbie trailer.
I did. I think the way it was described was better than it is, but I like the idea.
Wait, you think that
I thought
you thought it was going to be more than what you got?
I thought it was going to be Margot Robbie smashing those little dolls, but it was the children.
Oh, okay. Well,
I mean, it looks fine, and then you get that little blip of her and Issa Rae and Ryan Gosling. I don't know. We'll see how subversive Gerwig can get.
Do you know who Noah Schnapp is?
That sounds familiar.
The kid from Stranger Things?
Oh, that's why. Okay.
He's come out as a homosexual. He said that I guess I'm more similar to Will than I thought.
My Instagram handle is...
Did you... I didn't finish I only watched season 1. But you watched seasons 2 and 3?
Yeah.
You watched all of them?
I watched all of them.
Were you aware that his character was gay?
No.
I think they say it in the show, don't they?
Maybe.
Or maybe not. Or maybe he confirmed it after the show. I don't know anything about this person, but that seemed relevant to bring up, that he is...
Well, welcome to the club. But, okay.
So Ed Norton, there's that show called Finding Your Roots.
Yeah, Sigourney's been on it.
So he was on it. That's the one where Julia Roberts, I think, that's the episode where she talks about Martin Luther King and Coretta, or no?
I thought she brought that up on a talk show. She was asked about
You're right. Anyway, he was on there, and it is confirmed that he is his 12th great grandmother is Pocahontas.
No.
Yeah.
Okay.
I thought that was interesting.
That is interesting.
Okay. We had a question about, like, how should...
Maybe Elizabeth Warren should do Finding Her Roots.
Oh, God. How should horror be categorized?
How should horror...
HORROR.
I don't want to use that expletive again.
Like, because there are so many different offshoots that they felt like to call, like, the umbrella of horror is too broad.
Kind of like,
and they're often disappointed.
Kind of like queer.
So, do you think that horror should be broken up into many genres? Yeah.
I think that if you have an interest in that...
I don't know that I like this question. That's why I'm like having a hard time.
Sure, but I mean, how invested are you in it? And of course, that can exist as a dialogue between interested people. But we live in a country where, so much other differentiations probably should be made first. So I'm not just expecting a lot of people.
I don't know that I think, like, a category of film needs... There's certain things, like, I'm looking at a bunch of hair products right now. I think that needs to be tagged and categorized properly, so when people search through, like, a shop page, they can find something that has a particular fragrance, is intended for volume, is sulfate free. Like, I think that makes sense to really break down so people can get an understanding of what they're buying, since they can't use it first. But with cinema, I just think, like, what do you want? I mean, to break it down, then really what needs to happen is you just need to read, like, the plot synopsis of everything you're considering, because I don't know, like,
I think what would be more appropriate for me and what I gravitate towards is much like, classifications in the animal kingdom. There's the kingdom is horror, the phylum would be babysitter horror, the class would be blah blah blah, the order would be, you know.
But see, you like that idea.
I like that idea for those that want to dig that far down into it.
But I don't know that I think that's helpful because it's like there have been so many movies that it's like
But we put
I,
those classifications on everything. Somebody else, not the artist themselves.
sure, but it's like if you're browsing through Amazon and they just have horror and then they have suspense. I mean, they do break it up into. I don't know that I don't like that. I mean, for our channel on the playlist, horror, suspense, thriller are all one thing.
Okay.
But I did that on purpose because I feel like there's so many things that are ambiguous. Like it's just hard to categorize. Um, I think something that's under the umbrella of horror, suspense, thriller.
Well, but again, that's where categorizations help, I think.
So you do think,
Where especially something's more of a hybrid, like comedy horror, which to me is not horror, it's comedy, but technically we're getting into dark comedy or
yeah, this conversation is not going where I thought it would. No,
oh,
not because of you. I didn't. Yeah, I didn't necessarily care for the question because I just don't know.
oh, he didn't
Because
care for the
well,
question.
because like how people think Hereditary or Midsummer are not horror films, and it's like, well, yeah, if you're looking for Freddy Krueger to bust out of someone's dream, no, it's not. But I think the bigger umbrella of something that has a mood and that's enough for me. And if I'm interested in a title, then I would just read the one sentence about it. So I don't know that I need 15 tags like babysitter,
No,
Korean. Like, I mean, it just gets so specific that it's like you're looking for a very specific movie. Why don't you just rewatch that movie you're trying to duplicate? I don't know.
sure, but like you're talking for a casual consumer, what if I'm trying to put together a list of, you know, uh uh pedo horror films or like,
I I don't
that
know.
deal with a certain
It
what
feels limiting.
if I'm looking to deal with something that's of a very specific nature, but I know there's a handful of films that have all touched upon it.
I'm amused that I feel this way because I'm surprised at myself, but I just think like it feels limiting to the creators of the films. Like if we start pushing this idea that like if you're gonna make a horror film and it's gonna be a creature feature, it has to follow this
Oh,
format,
good. No,
or you're gonna
no.
be
I don't think that's
miscategorized. I'm not saying that's what you think. I'm just thinking that that's my fear with like people wanting to know exactly. This is not like the food you're ordering on Uber Eats or some shampoo you're buying from Ulta. This is like someone's art.
well, it's never going to be categorized exactly.
No, it's not. So that's why I think that it does. To me, I don't need a bunch of subgenres. Maybe the region it's from, for language purposes, but I don't know that I need to know that it's, you know, like
I'm
it's scary in this way. It's just horror suspense. Like there's going to be some dread. Like you read the one sentence
Oh,
and
sure. I think I'm approaching this subject from a purely organizational standpoint and not as something I am consuming or am looking for a particular
oh,
feeling to
I
get
I
while I'm.
think to organize it, yeah, you do need certain markers like
That's how I'm
read,
talking. But
but very general, like region, date. Like I should be able to search, like, oh, this is categorized as horror from Spain in
mhm.
the '80s, and then I have that cohort. And then it require like if I really want something specific, then I should probably do some work. I don't want someone to cure like I don't want tags on a and like a product to be used to curate for me what I think I want because if you are a casual person, I feel like you need to take the effort to try to find something that appeals to you.
Mhm.
And if things are super categorized, you probably are not going to be exposed to the full breadth of what's out there. So like if you're just really into like Japanese movies about creepy girls and that like that's just like what you keep trying to duplicate the feeling you had when you watched The Ring or whatever for the first time. I don't know. I mean, go off if that's what you want to do, but I just don't. That's how I took the question when the person wrote it, which was much longer than what I said. That it was more like that they don't like that they don't know what they're getting, and it's like, well, when you open a book, when you listen to a new song, like you don't know. There's a reason you gravitated towards that.
Top 10 creepy Japanese girls with a gaga twist. Go.
Because to me, even like the artwork for a film can be misleading. Like
Hmm.
there's a purpose for it. So
Yeah.
it's like that's what to me like over categorizing films would be like.
Yes.
It's like being duped by a cool movie poster.
Sure.
So babysitter camp or like summer camp slasher horror. Okay, there are a lot of those out there, but they're not going to be of the quality or give you the feeling of Friday the
That you
13th.
had the first time watching
Yeah.
Sleepaway
I
Camp.
don't know. I'm going on about something that I didn't think about much, so I feel stupid now. We can move on to Sorry to This Man.
Oh.
In our women talking review,
I completely forgot to talk about Frances McDormand.
you didn't say a single word. I don't even think you said a word that started with F. So yeah, but probably the reason you didn't is because she's
She's
not.
barely in it, but
Yeah, she doesn't have anything
she
to do in
she's
it.
in it. A friend was watching it, and I had the same thought of it's like Meryl Streep in Suffragette. It's like you can't really. She's not really in it. In a moment, she has like
Yeah, her
a moment,
character's in the beginning,
and
and
she
then
pops up very. She doesn't even have dialogue in it.
she doesn't like what the women are talking
Mhm.
about, so then she leaves, and then that's the end of her.
But I think it doesn't even matter. She's just the barest of accents and is lending her name to a project, really. But yeah, I think there were obviously much more interesting things to talk about in that film.
Do you want to address how to pronounce Saban films, or is it Saban?
It's Saban,
Okay.
but being where I'm from, I grew up with a family whose last name was Sabin, spelled the same way, pronounced that way. So I know we'd received that comment a few times, and I'm like, okay,
I appreciate that
let
we
me look
shouldn't
up this.
mispronounce,
Of course
names,
not,
but I also think it's funny that most of the Saban films we review are not
Saban.
Saban, are not good movies. So it's like this is what you're focusing on is how we said Saban when this movie's terrible, but
Because
okay.
the man who created the Saban Entertainment Group is technically Israeli American, so his that's how you pronounce his name.
Well, I certainly don't want to purposely mispronounce a name, so Saban.
Of course not. I just
Yeah,
don't. I'm not into the uh, practice of looking up how to produce distributors' names, I guess. But
but
which is fine
noted.
now that I know.
Yeah,
Um,
noted that. Yeah, and then in one video you were talking about Diana Ross. You were talking about The Bodyguard,
I said something else wrong.
and you said that it was originally supposed to star Diana Ross and Steve McQueen.
Or Ryan O'Neal. I think
So,
that both of those names have been brought up in conversation with
and
that
then
film.
someone like there were two comments about no, it's Diana Ross and Ryan O'Neal. I thought Steve McQueen was a director. So,
Steve McQueen was a white matinee idol
oh,
before it was Steve McQueen, the black director.
I guess I only know the black directors.
Well, I mean, Steve McQueen from Bullets and The Great Escape and Papillon. You don't know any of the Sand Pebbles,
Mm-mm.
The Blob.
I know there's a movie called The Blob.
He's the star in that, who's like a total grown ass man is playing a high schooler. Uh, I Yes, because Diana Ross used to date Ryan O'Neal, but there were other references to Steve McQueen being potentially in conversation for that film at one point as well.
Noted. Films released we didn't cover. The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck.
Documentary that came out like last Wednesday, based on a book of the same name. It's a documentary about finding true happiness while embracing one's own flaws and limitations, directed by Nathan Price and featuring the man who wrote the book, Mark Manson.
Grasshoppers.
I might write about this for our site. Brad Bischoff debut in the stars Saleh Bakri, who I also just watched in Blue Kaftan and another film that's going to come up in today's conversation. And that I don't know if it's because he played a gay character in Blue Kaftan and I looked at him in a different light, but I'm like, oh, he's an incredibly handsome man. Uh, and I don't know if, yeah, again, I don't know if I paid more attention because he played a gay character versus, a vast filmography of straight ones. But this movie was kind of interesting, but very indie. It's about this immigrant couple who uh, are kind of squatting and having a difficult time in this fancy resort community where everybody's on vacation, and they decide to go enter each residence since no one's home and have a drink. And so by the end of it, they're really drunk and maybe kind of starting to deal with some of their issues, and of course, not being able to have children and blah 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 blah. Will remind you a lot of things, such as Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. But I didn't love it, but it's interesting for a limited independent film.
Hmm. And then Alcaraz.
Caras by Carla Simone from
Oh, I thought that was Carly Simon.
no,
Carla Simone. Okay.
yeah, well, I didn't have the accent on that won Berlin in 2022, and it opened this weekend. Was also Spain's submission for Best International Feature, which I liked well enough. You know, last year Berlin was kind of a weak crop, and Alcaraz did stand out. I don't know, whoever's hailing it as a masterpiece on the poster apparently hasn't seen a lot of film, but it's very familiar and similar to a lot of other films. That basically this family of harvesters that finds out that have been there for generations, but they don't actually own the land because grandpa never got anything in writing about it. So they're about to be evicted, and then what they're going to do. And also some other unrest going on in the industry in this region of the country. Again, good performances, good writing. If you've seen any kind of film, you've seen this story before in some shape, way, or form. But it's fine. That opened this week. I didn't even ask you if you wanted to watch it.
Oh. Um, 1 second, because I just learned something interesting. All right. So movies we watch for fun. I put on Jack Frost, or you did.
I think it was a mutual decision.
What did you think of Jack Frost?
I hated it.
Oh, I thought it was funny. Because it seems like the people who made it knew exactly what they, were they knew what they were doing. And I think all the years that I saw the poster like in the video store for Jack Frost and online, I assumed it'd be like this super low budget, like unbearable film to watch. And the production quality is actually pretty good.
They did a little with a lot, or they did a lot with a little,
Yes.
which I think is apparent, but it gets tedious.
Uh sure. I was very amused by
Uh,
it, more so than you apparently, but I think I was pleasantly surprised because I assumed it would be like schlock.
yes. And I want to go back to something quickly, and not that I didn't have time to duly research this because it's just always been in my head movie. But if you Google Steve McQueen, Diana Ross, The Bodyguard, Wikipedia does immediately come up as Lawrence Kasdan wrote the film in the mid '70s originally as a vehicle for Steve McQueen and Diana Ross.
Oh, okay.
So yes, his name was in conversation culturally with that project in the '70s.
According to Wikipedia.
Well,
Which anyone can post on, but whatever.
well, there's another article from 2020 from cheatsheet.com, which references that as well. I think that if you go back in the trades, I bet you find that somewhere.
Sure. I mean, okay.
Whatever, it didn't get made with them.
You watched a movie called A Hard Day's Night?
Yes, the mockumentary about the Beatles, which Spice World is trying hard to be, directed by Richard Lester, who won the Palme d'Or, I think, just 2 years after this for The Knack and How to Get It, which I also recently watched and talked about, which I'm sure you don't remember. And then we watched Richard Lester's The Ritz with Rita Moreno recently.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, yes, it's the Beatles starring as themselves. This movie is hailed as one of the best of its kind. It's on all kinds of prestigious lists. I was amused, but also kind of minimally. I do like the Beatles catalog, I guess. Uh, to be honest, I was a little bored, but I guess knowing their impact and that this is at the height of Beatlemania, I can understand why people were so intense about it.
The UFO incident.
Which I reviewed for our site, a Blu-ray release from Kino Lorber. I think the Blu-ray came out in June. I'm way behind on things I get, but we watched this together.
Yeah. Uh, I I would say it's worth a watch if it's easily accessible. It's James Earl Jones and
Estelle Parsons.
Estelle Parsons playing. It's based on a true story of a couple, an interracial couple who claimed they were abducted by aliens, and it's told from the perspective of their therapist attempting to, like through hypnosis, try to understand like what their experience was, because certainly the therapist is skeptical that aliens abducted them. And there's some inconsistencies in their stories, particularly from the wife, who maybe conflates like a dream
Hmm.
with what she thinks happened by being abducted with aliens. And then for the husband, I think it's safe to assume that some trauma related to being a black man in the 50s
Hmm.
and 60s probably,
Well,
um,
and being part of an interracial couple that's in a very white community.
certainly probably influences mental health and how he saw things and how he's interpreting. And maybe they're having this shared experience that they're choosing to.
As a way to kind of work out, I think, the trauma that they're experiencing.
But
But
of course, the story is, it's based on a true story. So obviously the ending is very clear, which is we've never discovered aliens. So
mhm,
we know that, there's no answer to the question except that the therapist seems to believe that this is just sort of a shared experience that they've created
mhm,
to deal with whatever traumas and anxieties they have. But unfortunately, I think the film's pretty dry up until the climax. I mean, I guess it's a climax where we get a scene where the therapist has the husband and wife under hypnosis in separate sessions, and we
mhm.
hear them sort of explaining what happened, and they're crying.
Oh my God.
And it is, I mean, it's uncomfortably funny.
Yeah. I mean, James Earl Jones and Estelle Parsons are going in these moments.
So I would recommend it for
If
that.
you like them, it's interesting because they both played in more notable films in as part of interracial couples in films that I think were very meaningful. James Earl both in 1970. James Earl Jones is in The Great White Hope as this boxer dating a white woman played by Jane Alexander, and
Mhm.
then Estelle Parsons is in the phenomenal Watermelon Man from Melvin Van Peebles.
Yeah, I need to rewatch Watermelon
Oh my God,
Man.
Godfrey Cambridge, who is in whiteface because the plot is he wakes up one morning and he's black, and then his white wife does not know how to handle it. So it's interesting that these two headlined this, and it was a movie made for television, the UFO incident. So I can see what they're trying to do, but it doesn't really work because it feels like a film based on a National Enquirer headline.
We watched Out of Sight. I had never seen it.
I haven't seen it in probably damn near 30 years.
You really liked it.
I did. I think it's one of Jennifer Lopez's best performances before she's trying too hard. She's not overly stylized yet.
Do I agree it's her best performance?
I
Sure.
don't not.
But I don't think it's difficult.
I don't know if it's
It's like
like
being the smartest Kardashian. I
the
don't
best. No, she has some good Selena.
I would say maybe Selena's probably my favorite performance of hers. I know people like The
The
Cell.
Cell.
I
Yeah,
think The Cell looks cool. I don't know that
yeah,
I think she's great in it.
sure.
But I would agree. Her work in Out of Sight is good, and I don't know that I really ever thought George Clooney was handsome, but in this movie, I think he's very
He is
handsome.
very handsome. Yeah.
The story's kind of ridiculous. It was definitely a fun ride.
Hmm. I like Ving Rhames.
I always like Ving Rhames, but yeah, I you liked it more than I did, but I do think it's good.
Hmm.
And if a person hasn't seen it, um, which I can't imagine anyone who's interested in George Clooney or Jennifer Lopez hasn't seen it.
Well, and it's on the verge of a lot of things because this is Soderbergh, and it's right before much greater hits, like the Ocean's 11 films, right? And it's before Jennifer Lopez's, it's before her first album. But
Yeah,
so it comes at a really interesting time in their careers, and I think was kind of overshadowed by the stars and the director themselves and what they would later do.
I think it's a little over the top, but it's not fun enough
Sure.
for me. But again, I still would give it like 3 out of 5. I do think it's a good
But
movie.
and I reviewed this for our site as well. But Elmore Leonard adaptations, the trifecta that are so good, Get Shorty, and which I really need to rewatch. It's been forever. And my favorite Tarantino, which is Jackie Brown, is also based on an Elmore Leonard film. And all of those films have that energy.
You watch Brahmastra Part One, Shiva?
Oh God, this was really hard for me to get through. Um, it's part of a planned uh, universe, Indian fantasy film directed by Ayak Mukherjee, and I watched it because I interviewed the actor Alia Bhatt for Gangubai Kathiawadi, like a filmed interview for a Q&A because she just had a kid and she couldn't travel here, and they're trying to amp up that film's Oscar potential because it got a decent amount of buzz since it premiered at Berlin last year. I did not like it. It was like a Marvel film, just set in India.
Hmm. You watch Joyland?
I missed this at Cannes last year in UCR. In certain regard, it is Pakistan's official selection, I think, for the Oscars. First time, I think it's the debut from Saeem Sadiq, and it's about a young man who becomes obsessed with this trans woman in this burlesque dance hall that he works in, and it was a lot more interesting and layered than I was anticipating, and I did enjoy it.
Identification marks? None.
There's a Jerzy Skolimowski retrospective going on right now. And I was going to see this in the theater, but Mubi had an advertisement for it, so I watched it. It's Skolimowski's debut, in which he stars himself in a character that I think playing a version of himself three times. It's about a guy that's about to enter into military service, and it's his last 24 hours before that happens. It feels very French New Wave. It really has that kind of energy. So reading about it, it was no surprise to learn that Godard championed Skolimowski from the get go.
Good guys wear black.
You watched part of this with me. This was terrible.
I
Uh,
don't recall.
with Chuck Norris.
Oh, that was hard to. And
Oh,
Chuck Norris is not. I mean, his from the neck down, he's very impressive, but the hair and the face
that
and
hair is
his acting is crunchy.
well. He
Oh,
can't. He can't. I like how you purred that. Yeah, he can't act his way out of a bag, which is what what's his name said about Maryland, and I don't agree with.
oh, I mean, if you're going to use that same, well, yeah, no. I mean, this is bad acting.
Um, it also has Ann Archer, which I guess I was kind of interested in, and she's acting like a little girl. And God, who else is? I'm forgetting who else is in it, but I think it was an disappointed because it's directed by Ted Post, who directed this gloriously terrible film. Well, it's not terrible. I think it's great. The Baby with Ruth Roman, which if you haven't seen The Baby from 1973, get out there and see it. And he also directed a Planet of the Apes sequel, and I think Magnum Force, one of the Dirty Harry movies. So my expectations for this, even though it starred Chuck Norris, were a little higher than what it gives because I hated it.
Blue Bayou.
Justin Chan's third feature, which I missed at Cannes 2021. I think because by the time I missed it at that festival, and by the time it came out, I was somewhere. I think it was in Venice. Uh, with Alicia Vikander, and it was interesting. It's a bit overwrought, even though it has a really interesting, important storyline about this Korean American guy who was adopted in the 80s by these trash white people who never he there's I think the statistics at the end were like 1945 through 1998. There's this law in effect that if you don't have the even as an adopted child, if it wasn't through the proper channels and you don't have the correct paperwork, you can be, if DHS is aware of you, you can be deported at the age of 18. And just like these people have grown up, Americans are just transported to these places where obviously they don't speak the language. They're completely detached and dissociated from. Like it's just inherently a story of great cruelty what we do to people. But I think John goes in with all kinds of extra melodramas that I don't know that he needs all of.
Lastly, the band's visit.
This was excellent. The debut of Iran Kolorin, Israeli filmmaker, who has a new film out this week that I was going to review for our site as well. And I just never seen it, even though it stars Tariq Saleh, who I just referenced, and this is him, in 2007, and an actress I love that is dead now, Ranit Elkabetz, who just a beautiful screen presence, who is also a fantastic director, writer. I was very entertained. It's about this uh, band of police officers, this musical band from Egypt that are stranded in this small town in Israel on their way to a performance, and a very human, touching story.
Okay, we need to take a break. Okay, apparently in me rushing you, you made a mistake. So what was that
Yes,
mistake?
rushing for the break. Tariq Saleh is the director of the Nile Hilton incident, and I meant Salah Bakri, who I referenced earlier in this conversation. And also, I referenced the person saying that Marilyn couldn't act her way out of a bag was Richard Widmark.
Unfortunately, there are entries in the obituary section. Someone named Owen Roizman.
Very notable cinematographer who shot The French Connection and The Exorcist for William Friedkin, and then also worked on a lot of very notable Sidney Pollack films such as 3 Days of the Condor, Tootsie, Absence of Malice, which I don't really love Absence of Malice, but I do like Sidney Pollack a lot. But yeah, he died. He was in his 80s.
And Anita Pointer died last week, and like right as we were it was in the we missed it, but
Mhm.
she was a member of the group the Pointer Sisters. They were a very popular group, female group in the 80s, really, is when
Mhm.
they were popping.
Mhm.
They have like over a dozen like top 20 hits. What's your favorite Pointer Sisters song?
I don't know. There's so many good ones. The Neutron Dance. My early childhood memories is buying a tape at a garage sale, like as a small boy with my mother, and really liking. Is it Slow Hand?
Oh, yeah, it's like that's not for
My
kids.
mom's like, I don't think this song's for you, but he likes it.
My like obviously like Neutron Dance, So Excited are really great tracks,
Oh
but
yeah.
I always find myself listening to Dare Me. I really like that song. And their song Automatic I do like, but there are other artists who have redone Automatic, like Ultra Nate has
Hmm.
done a version of that I really like. But yeah, the Pointer Sisters, I was reading about them. They started out as a duo, like the two sisters, and then they brought on a third and then a fourth and then let go of one. So the ones that we ended up with are the ones who we know for their big songs. But I'm sorry, Ruth is my favorite Pointer Sister,
Hmm.
but Anita, it looks like she fell ill like in 2015, 2016,
Hmm.
because they were still touring, but they were having to use like Ruth's, like Anita was on tour with them, but Ruth's like granddaughter was also part of the group. But I was reading that because Ruth was on season 6 of The Masked Singer, which I did not know. So now I have to watch season 6 of The Masked Singer to see Ruth Pointer. But originally it was supposed to be Ruth and Anita,
Oh,
but she couldn't because she was sick. And apparently she died from cancer. But another thing about Anita Pointer that I remember is she has her own episode of Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous.
I think I've seen that because I remember you showing showing her house.
She's so fabulous. And, I think I really like Ruth's voice. It's kind
Hmm.
of gravelly and deep. And Anita has more of like a belty singer's voice.
Hmm.
And, people would always comment on their appearance that they weren't the most attractive bunch of ladies, which I don't agree with. I think Anita was beautiful.
Yeah,
And so is
yeah.
Ruth. Um,
Haters,
they're haters. But anyway, yeah.
including amongst them Jodie Watley.
Oh, yes, that's true. Look it up. But yeah, so she's no longer with us. All right, The Secret Movie, it was your choice.
Was gonna watch something else, but we ended up being a time crunch, and the film I wanted to select, which I guess I'll pick 2 weeks ahead of time, is longer,
I mean, this one was nearly 2 hours. So how long was that other movie?
159 minutes.
Oh God. Well, the film you chose is the 1987 British film directed by Stephen Frears,
Hmm.
Prick Up Your Ears.
Hmm. Which is supposedly a phrase that means depending on how you say it, like prick up your ass.
So Prick Up Your
Yeah,
Ears is
arse.
the title. It's based on a play,
Hmm.
and it's about the playwright Joe Orton
Hmm.
and his lover partner Kenneth Hallowell.
Hmm.
And the stories, I was not familiar with this gentleman or these gentlemen, but the story as it's told in this movie is pretty basic. These two guys meet when they both attend the Royal Academy of Dramatic Arts as like young men.
Hmm.
They develop a relationship. We see they've been together for 10 plus years, and during that time Joe has become more notable than Kenneth as an artist, and Kenneth has grown to resent him. In the movie, Joe is played by Gary Oldman,
Hmm.
and Kenneth is played by Alfred Molina. And I mean, arguably, Gary Oldman's more attractive in the movie, and that's how his character is supposed to be, like the more desirable one. And Kenneth, his resentment builds up. He becomes a recluse. He has high anxiety. He's paranoid, very frustrated. Joe is hypersexual,
Mm-hmm.
constantly looking for sex. And we can talk about it. But it all leads to, now that, Joe's success is growing and he's making money, and clearly Kenneth is unhappy. One night, Joe comes home and asks Kenneth, like, what if we break up? Because maybe we should. And Kenneth gets mad. And Joe goes to sleep, and Kenneth bludgeons Joe to death with a hammer and then kills himself with a drug overdose. So that's the story we're told, and it's told via, well, two methods. One is that Joe kept a very detailed journal. So there's a biographer played by Inconceivablish. What's his name?
Wallace Shawn.
He is this
Inconceivable.
Inconceivable. He plays this biographer who is working with Joe Orton's agent, played by Vanessa Redgrave,
Mm-hmm.
to help him understand who he was so he can write this book. So she's sort of narrating, and then we're sort of getting stories that are plucked out of the journal. I really like the construction of the narrative.
I do too.
Overall, I thought this was a very good movie, considering it's from the 80s and it stars two men who I'm presuming have always identified as being straight men.
Mm-hmm.
I thought it was pretty bold.
Yeah, I think it plays very bold.
And the first half of the movie is not meandering, but it's definitely like, I didn't expect it to become so sexual. And it's
Mhm.
not sexual and sort of like we're seeing graphic acts of sex, but more of the talking about it and how open these two were, like literally, and also with just like,
Well, it felt very true to the culture, the queer culture of these men, like, and how they would go off and cruise together, and what that meant for them as a couple. And it, you just didn't see anything really around this time period, even, you know, attempting to deal with that subject.
this movie's critically acclaimed. Roger Ebert gave it 4 out of 4 stars, although I was reading his little thing and he's really giving praise to Vanessa Redgrave's performance as being the highlight, which I don't know that I would think that. She's great, she's fine, but she's really not the anchor. I feel like,
Well, they're doing some interesting things with her character, and I love her screen presence. But
sure,
you know, she's really getting in between two different couples in this movie, because Wallace Shawn is married to Lindsay Duncan, and they're both writing this biography of Joe Orton, and clearly, what Vanessa Redgrave, her actions are pivoting away from the Lindsay Duncan character, and she's manipulating, like she did with Orton and Kenneth.
they are what's lacking for me in the so I think I just would have wanted more. Like this could have been a longer movie
Sure.
because there are several things happening. There's this relationship between Joe and Kenneth and the complexity of it. And it's really interesting to talk about because like how sort of the desire that the one had for the other, and the resentment the other has for, like, that could be a movie on its own. And then you have
Uh,
sort of the
like,
artist,
like a very British scandal.
and then the artist on both sides, Joe and Kenneth, and their work, and then sort of this culture of like gay sex in the 80s in the UK,
Well, the 60s.
sorry, 60s, and then the biographer and his wife and her, and just the confrontation of like queer topics
Hmm.
from these side characters. I think all of it could have been paid more attention to. Ultimately, it is a very nice package, but
Hmm.
there's a lot that I think, I mean, all of it could have been expounded upon.
Sure.
But of course, it's like,
I think
do I want a 3.5 hour movie? No.
they're also lucky with, I think, what they got away with. And you know, thinking Stephen Frears, who would do Dangerous Liaisons after this, but just prior to Prick Up Your Ears, he did another very gay movie that's a classic, well lauded, My Beautiful Laundrette, with Daniel
Mm.
Day Lewis, which I believe I feel like I showed you when we were first dating.
I There's another movie, or has the Beautiful Laundrette been remade? Oh, no, 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 the guy with the blonde hair, and then like, yes,
Daniel Day Lewis.
I'm familiar with the movie. Yes,
Hmm.
I'm just gonna go through my notes. So the biographer, uh, what's his name again?
Wallace Shawn.
Wallace Shawn. The woman playing his wife, she is dictating or transcribing the journal, like typing it out. So
Lindsay
it's,
Duncan, who you've seen in a few things.
and we find out, and it's Gary Oldman's journal, and we find out that when Gary Oldman was like a teenager, his parents sent him to school to learn how to type because they thought that was going to be the most reasonable career for him.
Mhm.
So he can write shorthand. So his journal's in shorthand,
Well,
some of
the
it,
sex
like the
parts.
sexy bits, so that he can sort of keep that secret. So as the wife is trying to transcribe it, she can't read it. And there's a scene where she's sitting in the house with her mother, and her mother used to be a secretary and learned shorthand. So she's asking her mother, "Could you help me read these journals?" And I thought that was a very fun scene because I think the movie does a good job of showing that, at least in the film, that these women, like all the female characters, seem much more attuned to sexuality
Hmm.
and much more accepting. So watching these two women decipher the shorthand, which is kind of graphic, they don't really bat an eyelash as much as they're like, "Oh,
The
okay."
mom's commentary is funny because she's like, "Oh, well," talking because he's talking about masturbating. She's like, "Well, of course he'd go do that after that," and like, "Oh, well, I would hope so."
But then I thought that was super interesting because I watched this documentary about gay erotica and how the number one consumer of it is like straight women,
Hmm.
because they like the themes and they like that there isn't this sort of misogynistic approach to,
Hmm.
but and then also being very rational about the acts. And so I thought that, yeah, how the mother was talking about it, she was thinking about it like, yeah, like this makes sense, that
Hmm.
what this person needed made sense for them and not what I think is weird or gross. um so when Kenneth and Joe meet at the Royal Academy of Dramatic Arts, there's a scene where they're on stage rehearsing,
They're doing
or
an acting
they're,
exercise.
yeah, they're doing an exercise, and the teacher tells them, because it's important to know, I think, that Alfred Molina is deliberately sort of supposed to not be very appealing.
Yeah, and looks older than he is. Doesn't know how to style. He's
There's
trying
even
to.
commentary
Yeah.
saying like, "Oh yeah, he's old. He looks older than he is, and he's styled like he doesn't look good
No.
compared to Gary Oldman,
Hmm.
who I think looks like the real life person's not exceptional, but I think he's meant to be like sort of a twinky little
Yeah,
cute thing."
like the norm that people seem to be, attracted to.
So when they're doing this acting exercise, the instructor says, like, pretend you're holding a cat.
Hmm.
So each of the students is holding a cat and tossing it to one another. And when it finally gets tossed to Kenneth, Alfred Molina's character, he basically like strangles and kills the cat,
Hmm.
the fake cat. And that's when we see Joe gravitate towards him.
Hmm.
But during that period, of course, Joe is trying to present as being straight, and he has a girlfriend, but he is, I mean, seemingly aroused by this dark side to Kenneth.
Yes.
And I think that's how the film is trying to show like their initial attraction.
Hmm.
Because obviously it would make sense that Kenneth just finds Joe attractive, but I was struggling with like, what did Joe see in
Well, he
Kenneth?
he offered. He was the an older gentleman that, not that much older, I don't
Mm,
think, but offered him a certain way out of where he was from.
right.
Like they reference Eliza Doolittle, which is of course based My Fair Lady is based on George Bernard Shaw's Pygmalion, but about this artist creating a creature that will then usurp them. And there's that whole A Star Is Born energy, like one's on their way up, the other is on their way down. Uh, but to me, and it doesn't directly say this, but my interpretation of why they stayed together so long is partly because Joe Orton felt like he owed this man something, because he kind of acted as a succubus. He gleaned everything that he could to recreate himself, cast himself in a new image, and become this playwright that many consider brilliant.
I think that's a good interpretation, that Joe felt guilty, like he owed this guy something, but he's giving him so little, which is like, we can just be together. I
Hmm.
don't really do anything for you, and I'm living my own life, but you still get to be with me.
Well, and then as he becomes famous, as a hanger on, Kenneth, there are certain um, what's the word I'm looking for? Why you would stay in a relationship? There are certain not
Benefits.
benefits from benefits. Like, because Joe Orton was also writing the script for the Beatles for a film, and there's a lot of energy placed on the potential excitement of
Well,
getting to.
yeah, Kenneth. I mean, I'm sure. Well, that's probably why a lot of couples stay together who one is more accomplished than the other. Is like they do get some shine and the benefits.
Mhm.
Yeah. So, it initially I was struggling, but yeah, what you said makes sense. So, where things really picked up in a direction that I was surprised is about the sex. And specifically, it's just describing like how they found sex. And it starts with a scene where Kenneth and Joe are at a park and they're cruising. And
Mhm.
Kenneth is not accustomed to that, but Joe is clearly very
Yes.
accustomed. And there's a scene where they find a guy, go back to his place, and both of them have sex with him. And it's not super graphic. We just
But
know
you
that
do
it's
you do
happening.
see these actors like tonguing.
But yeah, I mean, I was pretty like it was pretty impressive how they went there with the
Mhm.
themes and the topics. Like they weren't shy, and I didn't need to see nudity, and you don't get a lot. We see Gary Oldman's little tush once, I
You do,
think,
yeah.
and you see him in his underwear a lot, but it's not super graphic beyond just like we know that he just had sex. But yeah, that cruising scene was pretty interesting, and then we get a lot of that. I mean, Joe is constantly
Everywhere he
looking
goes.
for sex. Just as an aside, there's a moment where they're eating and they put on their plate rice pudding, sardines, and jam.
Mhm.
And I threw up a little bit in my mouth.
Oh, well, that's what that your dinner is tonight.
If you served me
Well, it didn't look appealing either,
rice,
but
I mean, you know, I love rice pudding. If
uh-huh.
you served me rice pudding and slap some sardines on top and then put some preserves on the corner, well, I would think you're being funny,
And wasting my money.
but you're also wasting my
Mhm.
money.
Mm.
And I'd probably just be like, well, I guess we have to go get some food
I guess
because
I'm guess I'm going out.
um, I thought a moment that there's a lot about it that resonated with me, but I think a moment that made me feel really bad is that Joe and Kenneth go out cruising at a point, and this is after their relationship has really started to deteriorate, and Joe clearly is not enticed by Kenneth, and Kenneth definitely doesn't feel desirable, and they're out cruising, and this is after Joe convinces Kenneth to start wearing a wig
Mhm. 'Cause he by now he's bald after
because he's
10 years.
completely bald, and it's clear Joe doesn't like that on him. So he convinced him to wear a wig, but Kenneth is feeling insecure and like this is not going to work. So Joe goes out cruising with Kenneth and then pays some guy to hit on Kenneth,
Mhm.
which I just thought was like, ugh, so manipulative and so sad. And then they do hook up, but then that scene, the police come.
Mhm.
So then there's like they both have to run, and so it that entire like that little 3 minute situation just spoke so much about what life must have been like during
Well,
that period for those people.
and part of what is keeping these 2 together is this toxic repressive culture as well.
Well, that's what I was gonna say is I think why it's so hard for some people to stay together, especially nowadays, is like people have so many options. People are seen, they're not afraid of like I can imagine in the 60s where like I could be arrested for being a homosexual, that if I did find another homosexual who wanted to try to live this pretend life with me, like where we have to be friends and roommates and have separate beds in our apartment just for companionship, you would make that work because it's not that easy to find.
Well, it's really easy to manipulate people because you know something dangerous about them.
Right. Whereas nowadays it's like, you know, like I feel like there's just not a lot to hold on to. Like people feel like they have a lot of options. But that's not what I'm talking about. I just was thinking like in that one scene, there's so much happening that just felt so icky and so stressful and so
Mhm.
unsatisfying. And yeah.
Well, even when he goes to get him out of the bathroom while the hookup's apparently going on, they're not doing anything. Alfred Molina's like, we were just talking.
Oh.
He's so tentative.
Speaking of the women in the film, these characters, people being so sensitive, their landlord is this lady
Yeah.
who immediately recognizes that they're gay because
Hmm.
they describe each other as friends when they go to see the apartment, and Joe is acting like, no, I'm not going to live here, and she sits on the bed with Kenneth and she's like, well, it's good to have friends, and basically acknowledging like, I see that you're a gay couple and I think it's great. And then throughout the film she's constantly like peeking in on them and like seeing them leave, and she's very proud of them, like, oh, what fabulous lives you live. and
The world's at your feet.
and I thought that was super sweet
Yeah.
that she saw them as like this special thing. uh
And then the mother, she is shown in flashback only once, played by the great Julie Walters. And I also like his sister, played by Frances Barber.
mhm. Then, excuse me, there's another cruising scene. This is after there's kind of an explosive scene where Kenneth wants to go to like an award ceremony with Joe, and Joe doesn't want him to go. And Kenneth is like, well, can I go? No, because the invitation is for me and a guest. So you can't go unless I go with you. So that's where, Kenneth is sour and feels like, well, I made your career and now I can't. But anyway, Joe does end up going. He takes Vanessa Redgrave, his agent. He wins an award. And then afterwards, instead of going home, he goes to the bathrooms to cruise,
Mhm.
which was a common practice for him. And then there's a scene where, like, I thought it was very well done
Mhm.
because it's a pretty big lavatory with lots of urinals and stalls and a huge sink area, like in the center, like an island. And there are all these guys just standing there. And when you know what cruising is, like, it's very obvious.
Mhm.
Like, no one needs to stand at a urinal for 5 minutes.
Mhm.
And then all of a sudden, when they feel like they're safe, they start removing the light bulbs in the bathroom so that it's pitch dark.
Mhm.
I thought that was very
And then
well
there's
done.
basically a little orgy. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Then, like, more and more sex. These fools, Joe and Kenneth, take a vacation to Morocco.
Mhm.
And it was very suddenly last summer to me, except
Yes.
that it is very explicit.
Yeah.
The minute they get on that goddamn beach, there there are all these young boys,
Yeah. There's a flock of boys following them to the ocean, and
and they're paying, and then clearly they're using them for sex, and it is not implied, like they are saying like this is what we're doing, and they are paying these young boys. I mean, they're not like 10 or 11, but they're definitely teenagers.
there's that line I thought of that Liz Taylor says in Suddenly Last Summer about Sebastian Venable, about how he got tired of the little dark ones and he wanted to move on to more white things.
Yeah, I mean, because it's like these brown skin, Moroccan boys, and I was shocked like how explicit it is
Hmm.
with what they're doing. We're not seeing anything, but then we move on
But
to.
then they have an instant there. Kenneth breaks his typewriter.
Oh, I was so annoyed.
Yes.
Yeah, Joe's trying to work because he's been commissioned to write this script for the Beatles, like a movie. And
And
so he
Brian.
takes a moment to get on the roof and type, thinking it looks relaxing. And then Kenneth is mad because he wants attention.
Hmm.
And then he throws Joe's typewriter over the building, which was so scary because it's like, what if that landed on someone? They would die.
Well, and then immediately his response is to go have sex.
Yeah.
Joe Orton.
Yeah. Which all feels very, you know, I think whoever wrote the script,
Hmm.
which is based on a play, did a very good job of capturing, I think, the essence of a lot of gay relationships, and like the the power struggle and that dynamic of wanting to feel desired and having options and sex being so easily attained. I think this movie does a very good job of showing how that can develop into a very toxic situation.
Yes, and so of course it's based on the actual biography of John Lahr, but Alan Bennett, who wrote the History Boys, wrote the screenplay. But yeah, I think he did a really good job.
Then we get a scene with the manager of the Beatles calling Joe to
Brian
talk about the
Epstein.
script, and he wasn't with that gay shit.
No.
He's like, because he's like, I'm into it, but there are a couple things we need to talk about.
Hmm.
First of all, you have the Beatles smoking weed. They don't do drugs. They have never done drugs, and they will never do drugs.
Liza
But the way he,
Minnelli.
but the way he said it was like, of course they do, but you're not gonna put that in this
Hmm.
movie. And then there's another scene where they all hook up with one girl,
Hmm.
and the agent's like, yeah, that's cool, except that you have them all in the same bed. And he's like, yeah, well, if they all had sex with the same girl, weren't they all together doing it? And it's clear, like, yeah, obviously that's how those kind of things work, but you're not gonna have the Beatles.
It's clear that the Beatles are not part of the sexual revolution of the swinging 60s.
And then there's another moment where they kind of talk about like it's possible that maybe one of the Beatles is gay, or
Hmm.
I thought that was interesting. But just the fact that Joe Orton had the opportunity to write a script for the Beatles is very intriguing.
Hmm.
Um,
Entertaining Mr. Sloan and Loot are his big plays. You know, he's murdered when he was 34. There's a film version of Entertaining Mr. Sloan from 1970 starring Beryl Reed, which I own and I've seen, and it is enjoyable.
We have 5 minutes left.
Oh,
I did want to say, I think probably the funnest moment of the film is when the mom dies and the family goes to her viewing, and we see Joe with his sister and their relationship, because it's like it's told in flashback, obviously, because the film open like we know that the film opens with the biographer meeting Vanessa Redgrave. So this is like they both have already died. So it's flashback, but then we get like flashbacks within the flashback, and we we can see that the relationship between Joe and his sister, and how she kind of always knew he was gay, and she really loved her brother and probably was concerned for him and wanted him to be more authentic. But they're like kind of like laughing at the funeral, and I thought
yeah,
that was funny.
yeah.
And then it transitions to him like cruising the funeral director's son, this young
Mhm.
guy, and then that's when his sister realizes like my brother's gay.
Mhm.
And then we move on to the bodies being cremated, and then we have the sister and Vanessa Redgrave with the ashes, and they're putting them together
Mhm.
like as if, which I thought was interesting, because like if you killed me, I don't know that I want to be
I
buried
think they
with
were
you.
trying to be respectful because they also had a long-standing relationship.
Which
But
I can appreciate, and I thought it was very sweet. But the sister's trying to measure the ashes, and I think Vanessa Redgrave says something like, "This is a
it's not a recipe.
yeah, it's not a
It's a
recipe. It's just a
gesture.
gesture. Like, why are you trying to measure out tablespoons of ashes into the thing?"
The thing about with the mother's funeral too is she didn't have her teeth in the casket
Oh, they were playing with her dentures.
because
That
they
was funny.
misplaced. So Gary Oldman takes the dentures and gives them to this young actor,
Right
right,
before he hits the stage.
like gives him his mother's teeth, and that's actress played by Stephen McIntosh, who's in another very interesting queer film called Different for Boys.
What would you give this film?
Is it different for boys or different for girls? I give it 4 out of 5. I think it's fantastic.
I would give it 3.5 out of 5. I think it's very good. I would definitely recommend it. I think, and Gary Oldman's really cute in this movie.
He is
So it's fun to see him in this kind of role.
well young and early in his career, and kind of a ballsy move for all these people to do this at this time.
Yeah, but they're also European, so I feel like there's a little more.
Leo,
My impression is that for him to transition to being a film star in the U.S., knowing that he's European, he probably gets more leeway from
sure.
American
And
audiences.
this did compete at Cannes, where I think the cinematographer won an award.
And also access to foreign film back then
Was different.
was different.
Yeah.
So probably no one had even seen or heard of this movie.
Well, yeah, the Academy certainly didn't nominate.
Because
For
what was
anything.
his big?
It got several BAFTA nods though.
What's Gary Oldman's like first big movie in the U.S.?
Oh, The Professional, maybe.
When was that?
Like 94.
Oh yeah. So I mean, who knew about Gary Oldman, this gay movie from 7 years prior, like in the U.S.?
I'm sure he has a really memorable role in True Romance. I think a year or so before that. But
Well, this was a good choice. We have 90 seconds left. Do you have a quote for us?
from Joe Orton,
Well, before you read the quote, do you have any? What are we watching this week?
Nia Long film called Missing, and House Party. It's
House
tomorrow.
Party, and we have a couple of videos dropping. I know.
I'm Saint Omer. I'm hoping you watch this week with me because it opens next week, and that's was on my top 10 of the year.
I'm aware, yes. But go ahead and read your quote from Joe Orton.
With madness, as with vomit, it's the passerby who receives the inconvenience.
Oh, that's true. Do you have anything else?
No.
Ta-ta.